bottlenecks, idle employees, idle equipment, floor space that you take up, warehouse cost. Maybe if you have too much inventory, this is all killing your cash flow.
Joe, we're back.
We are back.
So we've been we're just starting a conversation around a bigger theme, why you're going out of business, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds comical, but it's not at all. It's actually true. Many companies find that they're just not sustaining the bottom line.
Right.
And especially today, so many challenges that we face with the pandemic and all kinds of issues within our organizations that we need to have tools to help us to solve these problems. And one area that we miss, and it's not glamorous, it's not sexy, but it sure does help tremendously, is identifying waste.
Yes.
And so the last episode, if you didn't listen to the last episode, we had a great conversation around the subject of
defects.
Go back and listen to that. We won't hash it back out. This is our second episode in this series. We're going to talk about a very real problem around overproduction. Yes. So what is overproduction?
Okay. A lot of times companies want to meet a certain shipping date. So what they'll do is they'll just keep producing their product or parts at a nonstop level. There's a few reasons they do that. One, they don't want to see a machine not running or a person not working. Okay. And two, if they're trying to hit these shipping dates, they'll start stockpiling parts. And then something happens, the COVID comes in or, the market changes and suddenly you have all of this extra inventory laying around. So it's okay to identify what your manufacturing time is. And most people who are ordering something, unless it's an emergency, and I could come up with examples of those, and those may be customers that you treat, with special care. But most people realize there's a production time and then a shipping date. So to do your production as your orders are coming in, and as close as you can get between order coming in, production starting, and then how many days out for shipping, will stop all of this overproduction, because these parts laying around, that's cash, and you're killing your cash flow by just having parts sitting around on the floor.
Yeah. So we're talking like Deming and just-in-time manufacturing. And so if someone's listening and say, well, I have a service business, so does this even apply to me? What do you say?
Well, depending on what the service is, you may have too many employees answering the phones. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that could be a case. Mostly this applies to manufacturing. when it comes to service businesses, do you have too many guys out in the field? Are you paying excessive salaries for guys that don't have work? And that's what takes us back to that low hanging fruit, that the first thing people usually do is they fire, get rid of the salary. But mostly this applies to manufacturing, where there's a quantifiable amount and there's a quantifiable time.
Yeah.
And to set up a process in order to get those as close to just in time, which, we know is from Toyota, came up with that, that just in time manufacturing. If you're a leader in a company that is manufacturing, do yourself a favor, educate yourself on just in time manufacturing. And this probably doesn't apply to a little mom and pop shop. It can.
Yeah.
But in bigger production runs and things like that, overproduction can be a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. And I mean, I like how you even brought it back into the service side too, because I remember when we ran mall kiosks, and it's so easy to cut all your margins away when you have too many people on the clock at the same time. So I was responsible for a lot of the personnel and the staffing as far as the times. And so I went back and had conversations with the management at each location, and when the peak times were, when it was slowest, when we needed to overlap on staff, when one person was necessary for the time being, and so on. And then creating the schedules based on that. And of course, then revisiting them and continuing to modify them and make changes as necessary. And I think that's also part of this relationship with the overproduction, right? Because if you're overproducing on the personnel piece, it's just as detrimental as having too much inventory on hand that you cannot sell. And I know, especially in like tech businesses and things like that, I mean, you're a sinking ship if you have, I mean, just as far as tech changes so fast that 3 months later, your inventory might be obsolete.
Your production goals really need to align with your customer needs. Let's go back and talk about service a little bit. When either within a company or from company to customer, there's a requesting of more information that is required. Now, I have an experience with this. So I have a terrible back. I go into the hospital emergency room. I can barely walk. I'm in a wheelchair. I'm in so much pain that I'm nearly passing out. And while I'm nearly passing out, there's a guy sitting in front of me asking my mother's maiden name. Okay. What probably should happen is you go ahead and you send the person back to the doctors, let the doctor start fixing them up, and then maybe come in and ask them, have I been at this address for 3 years? Like a lot of times there's requests for information either at the wrong time, and that is the wrong time, or there's a request for information that has a redundancy. So, you have papers that are moving throughout a company, and maybe you're checking it once, twice, 3 times. That kind of redundancy is also overproduction.
Interesting. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we don't think about that very often.
No.
And that's really critical.
Hospitals are some of the worst at having defects and overproduction and redundancies. They just seem to stick out because there's, they cover a lot of territory. So they have a lot of opportunities to mess up, and they usually do.
Yeah.
So, not to pick on hospitals, we need them, but almost every one of them can be more efficient at what they do.
Well, and then what does greater efficiency do? It can drive costs down.
Exactly.
And we've got, if we're in a situation to where at bare minimum, where, we've got the waste from either overproduction or defects, think about how high our medical care costs, right? And of course, there's lots of factors, but if there's room to drive those costs down, how much better of an experience will the end user have by having lower cost healthcare? I know when you see your average person who has a 5, 10, 15% increase annually in their healthcare costs, it's unsustainable, really. If we're just on the subject, because my salary's not going up 5, 10, 15%. So how am I able to continue to afford, those rising costs? Yeah.
Exactly. One other thing to think about from the manufacturing side, because overproduction is a waste and inventory is a waste. So we can't always think of overproduction as inventory, but look at it this way. Say you have a company and there's 3 departments. You have a machine shop, you have a welding shop, you have a sheet metal department. Okay. Because I spent time in manufacturing. The machine shop may be working on parts that the welding shop and the sheet metal department, they're all working on parts for the same machine. But maybe the machine shop is kicking them out 3 or 4 times faster than the welders can. Or maybe the sheet metal department is sending stuff down to the welding department much faster than they can run production on it. So overproduction might be, hey, slow down in this department and then move on to something else, because there's no reason for the assembler to have 1,000 of one part, 20 of another, maybe an empty bin for another part. Like, that's overproduction, and that's what creates waste. So where maybe you have that machinist that's making those 1,000 parts, if you could take that person and move them into another area or onto another part, where you have more production flowing in that area, then that is a way to stop overproduction.
Which then brings you back to the conversation of personnel and proper training.
Yes.
And setting the right expectations, because in order to move them, they have to be qualified to assume that role.
Yes. Yes. And that's where training comes in. And we talk about the importance of training, I think, in the last episode.
Yeah. And also communicating and listening. And so even as we're talking about waste, but we're also talking about leadership. And we're talking about having conversations to set the right expectation that we work as a team. There will be times where we may have to change how we work so that we can still reach our mission together. Mm-hmm. And I think that I don't think we have enough of those kind of conversations in organizations.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good lead in, overproduction is a good lead into inventory as a waste. And inventory is a finished product that hasn't sold. Okay. So what's the first thing you do when you have a whole bunch of inventory? You go to your sales staff and you start yelling at them about, hey, we need to sell more of this product, right? Like that's one of the things you do. The other thing you can do is not make so much inventory. A lot of times we see people come in for commercial loans, and this loan is basically based so that they can build up inventory. And the first thing you want to ask them, whether you're their lender or, if you're running that company, is why do we want this buildup of inventory? Just sitting there, it's taking up capital. It's not being sold. The key here, to recognize, one, why isn't it selling? Okay. Like if the red one is selling and the blue one isn't, don't stock up a bunch of blue in your inventory. So, bottlenecks, idle employees, idle equipment, floor space that you take up, warehouse cost. Maybe if you have too much inventory, this is all killing your cash flow.
Yeah. I think about a couple companies that are at the top of the market in these areas. I think of like the Costco versus Sam's model, where Costco gained in market share in some ways because of inventory turnover. They had a much faster inventory turnover, and so that allowed them to gain in terms of how much revenue they brought in.
It's a great example.
Yeah. Another one is Apple. Back to Apple. Jobs didn't want to have internal manufacturing. He wanted to just in time the product. And so it helped Apple increase at the time when Samsung and others were doing a lot of their own manufacturing. Apple it became the world's most valuable business, in part because they didn't have those bottlenecks and all that waste to deal with internally in the organization. I mean, it's huge. I mean, we don't think about it. We don't talk about it. Like I said, it's not attractive, but it really makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Overproduction, inventory. Those are two big ones in manufacturing. And one is that when you're using up floor space, people don't often think about that big corner full of inventory. If it wasn't there anymore, maybe I could put another machine there. Maybe I could set up another line of revenue there. What could I put in that floor space to make money? So we're eliminating waste of that inventory, and we're increasing revenue by bringing in another line, bringing in another machine, renting that space out to somebody. Space is money.
Yeah.
And people don't think about how much of it they waste.
Well, that's another one. We don't think about that. It's in a sense, it's overproduction, right?
Yeah.
Because anytime you have more than you need of whatever resource that you have can be considered overproduction.
Right.
Yeah. And eliminating it.
And when you look at, big hardware stores, I mean, they're basically just warehouses that you're buying out of. There's no back room where they're storing anything and they're bringing it out as it gets low. They just stack it up on the shelves, and they're not really wasting any space. The stuff that you're buying underneath it, when it's gone, they just take the one above it and put it back down where you would buy it off of the sales floor. So that was a really good model of hardware stores. If you look at Lowe's, you look at Home Depot, they basically just took all their floor space and made it sales space.
Interesting.
Everything's up.
Yeah. 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 All that space utilized.
All that space is utilized. They don't need, another 100,000 square feet to store inventory. They just stack it on top of each other. And it really just looks like a big warehouse when you go in there.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating.
It's a great model.
It is a great model. And so if you're speaking to an organization that carries inventory, and someone's listening now and says, yeah, but I have to keep all this extra inventory because I never know what I'm going to need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know a lot's traveling through your brain right now.
Yeah. There's so many factors for that. One would be, how are you harvesting your data? Data should tell you what's coming up around the corner. Now, if you get a big contract on something and they say like, hey, we need 100,000 pieces of this, of course, within that contract, there's going to be some wait time and delivery time. But if it's just for the day-to-day kind of sales stuff, you should be looking at spreadsheets. You should be taking in data. How many you sold in this month? How many you sold in that month? How many sold those previous years? And you should have a pretty good idea of how much inventory. I'm not saying don't keep any inventory, but how much inventory you should have to meet your customer need. So not knowing what's coming around the corner is basically a lack of data collection.
Yeah. And we'll deal with, I believe, on some subsequent episodes, issues with waste on shrink or loss of inventory, which puts us at a further disadvantage and a further risk.
Yes.
Because if there's, I'm dating myself, like 30 CD players in inventory and maybe 29 only really need to be there, that could be a problem as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is a real problem.
Yeah,
for organizations. It's good. So as far as because someone's thinking right now, well, I don't have an inventory issue. I don't manufacture, but I am in the service industry, and I think I'm a little top heavy on my staffing.
Yes. Okay, I hate saying this, but you're forcing it out of me. Staff is inventory. Okay. Anything that's costing you money for being there is inventory. And if it's not helping your bottom line, that's when, unfortunately, you have to make that cut. That's when you have to do it. When your personnel is just too much inventory on the business.
It's tough to do, and we're not talking about when you need those people and you say, well, we're just trying to cut costs. So,
right.
Sally and Jim, you've got to go, and Mark and Jane, you're going to be doing 1.5 times the work each to make up the difference.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about.
No, we started out with, hey, so you're going out of business.
Right.
We're trying to save your company. Okay. So you don't want to let people go if you don't have to. These are lives you're affecting, and you have a responsibility to these people as their employers. But from an employer point of view, you have to know when to make cuts in personnel, and you have to look at personnel as inventory, not when you're speaking to people, but on paper, on your spreadsheet, there's unfortunately they become a number, and those numbers have to equal net profit at the end of the year. Or no one's working.
Right. That's the flip side of it. Right. And that doesn't mean the decision has to be an either or necessarily. Sometimes it's an and. In other words, sometimes we move some people into a part-time position. Mm-hmm. I've seen organizations do an across the board part-time to where they've moved, and that, as long as it's agreed upon, and some people can do it, some people can't do it, but there's other ways too, mm-hmm. to reduce waste of having too much, inventory in terms of human capital. I know the term seems really cold.
It does. It does. And then I hate to say it in that way, but if you're a businessman right now, if you're an entrepreneur right now, and you've put your heart and soul into a business that you think maybe is going under, and you've known Sally for 20 years and you don't want to let her go, but maybe it saves your business. To me, it's not a question of ethics. It's a business decision. You let Sally go, you save the business. It's just the unfortunate cold hard fact of that.
Right.
And it sounds terrible because we lead as servant leaders, but you also have to serve the company.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the key. The key is, what is the vision? What is the mission, and what are the values of the organization? Yep. And if you haven't identified those yet, strongly urge you to do so In fact, we're going to have an entire series on mission, vision, and values in an organization, because we make decisions. Once we can identify our vision, our mission, and our values, we can then make decisions that move us forward. And so they become less about what I feel and more about what will sustain our justification for existence.
Yes.
And then you make the decisions based on that. And it's less about the emotional aspect of it, although there are places for emotion as well in a business environment, but not to the detriment of solving the kind of problems that will lead your business to have a real sense of purpose.
Right. So if you're taking notes, overproduction, inventory, sometimes the cure for that is to slow production, move personnel around. If you have too much inventory, find out why, collect data, see why it's not selling. Don't take up the floor space. And if you have to remove employees, that's the case.
Hey, Joe, we set a timer this time.
We did.
Because we went pretty long the last time, and that's our timer going off.
Yeah, these are important issues. So they take some time to kind of discuss and discover,
flesh out. Yeah, man, it's good stuff. Hey, if you're listening and you're interested in getting more information, head to the website. We'll have a template for you on this particular subject. GreatSummit.com. Continue to walk with you on your journey to excellence in leadership. Joe, thanks, man.
Thank you, Nate. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, man. I'm so honored you were able to join me on this episode of A Call to Leadership. Now, this might not be for everyone, because you really have to be in a certain place in order to take the kind of steps to level up your leadership. And I want you to be taking steps. And for those of you who feel like you're ready for something like this, there's a place you can go. You can go to our website, greatsummit.com. I'll make sure that's in the show notes. But here's the cool thing that we have. We've got a masterclass. We have all different kinds of events. We even have our leadership club where you can meet other people just like you. I can't wait to see you there. I'm Dr. Nate Sala, and this is A Call to Leadership.